The long-awaited video that I've been meaning to do for quite a while. I've teased it in other videos. I've talked about it in pretty much every video, but today is the day that I finally review and talk about the Canon C70. What is up, guys? Welcome back to another YouTube video. My name is Royce Chamberlin. I'm a videographer based out in Tampa, Florida. All right, we're gonna jump right into it. I've broken this up into three parts, kind of odd specs, the ports, because there's a lot of them on here, and then just my favorite features about the Canon C70. There's a million different things to go over on this camera, a million different pieces that, frankly, I'm still learning. I'm still learning about the camera myself, but I've used it for over a year now and I have a lot to say on it, so we can just dive right into the specs. They're very impressive. First off, it's not full frame. I know it feels like I'm starting off with like a downer. It's not full frame, but it's still a incredible Super 35 sensor. So it's very cinematic. It's what's been used in the field for a very long time. I've not noticed anything bad about it. Quite frankly, I like it a lot because, for instance, with lenses like my 18 to 35 that I'm using right now, on a full frame, you'd have a lot of vignetting. Even on this, I don't know what focal length I'm at right now with the lens, but you'd have a lot of vignetting. With the Super 35, you kind of don't have to worry about that stuff. It looks great. It's very cinematic still, so I love that. Next, it shoots in 4K. Obviously, 4K 60 is what I shoot at most of the time because sometimes you like to get that slow-mo-ness. But it also shoots in 4K 120, which is incredible. I don't use very often. I probably should, but it does that, and it shoots in 2K 180. That's a lot of frames per second. 120 is a lot of frames per second. You're gonna get some pretty good slow-mo shots with that, but 4K 60 is still pretty normal, and it obviously does 4K at 23.98 and 29 frames per second, 30 frames per second. Next spec, this one blows my mind, and I don't quite get it because it says it has 16 plus stops of dynamic range. 16 plus, I mean, this is a cinema camera. It is their cross between, as far as form factor and capability, it's a cross between a DSLR, a standard DSLR, and their C300, 500 line if you know anything about it. It's their cross, it's their hybrid. It's small, it's compact, but still packs the punch, and it has 16 plus. I don't know what plus means, 16.2, I don't know, but 16 plus stops of dynamic range, which basically means the shot's gonna look real good. It's not gonna be overblown, not gonna be too dark in certain areas. It has a lot of information in the picture. It shoots 10-bit, that's another spec. So that's incredible. It also shoots in Canon Log 2, 3, PQ, and HLG HDR recording. I don't use HDR recording very much. I like to just shoot in log. And I'm pretty familiar with Canon Log 2. I don't use Canon Log 3 very often. Maybe one day I'll make a video where I compare the two, but they're there. But again, I shoot mostly in Canon Log 2. The next spec is this sucker does have dual pixel CMOS autofocus. That's the Canon's top of the line autofocus. It works flawlessly. It's currently, I can see it on my screen, tracking my eyeball. So it has that, as well as the EOS ITR AFX. I don't know what that is, but it's there. It also comes standard with an RF mount lens, but I think I've talked about this in the past. It has an RF mount on it, but I have an adapter so I can use all my wonderful EF lenses that I've invested over the years. I don't want to lose those. I love those, right? So I have the adapter. The adapter is great. Gives me a couple extra stops of aperture, so that's nice. And it has an ISO range of 100 to 102,400. I did a video, and I'll link that right there. Click the button if you want to watch it, about the Canon R. The max ISO on that, if I remember, actually I have that note right here. The max ISO on that was, yeah, I'm correct, 40,000. Let me repeat it again. This camera, the Canon C70, has ISO range from 100 to 102,400. That is an insane amount of ISO range. I mean, I've never ever used that. I should probably do a test to see just how grainy it gets. I'm sure it handles it like a champ. But man, I mean, you could basically see in the dark with this thing. That's insane. So, I mean, those are the list of like the specs that people care about, right? How far can I push the camera? What can I record in 4K 120? How many stops of dynamic range? What kind of log does it have? Right? These are cinema questions that videographers ask, right? As far as capability goes. Those are here. They have it. You should be excited, just from the specs list. Next thing I'm going to go over is all the different ports on it. It's got a million different wheels and customizable buttons, range from 1 to 13 or 15 or whatever it is. You can customize all of them. And I've customized them myself to do certain things. For instance, the button right next to the record button, I can switch from tracking, like face tracking autofocus, to just standard like area box autofocus. It's really nice in certain scenarios where I'm looking at a subject and they're like, go check that out. I just click the button and now I'm tracking just the area and it's not looking for a face. So you can do a lot of cool strategic stuff like that. But anyways, alongside those buttons comes a lot of ports. You get 2 mini XLR ports. I'm using one right now. They work great. They are minis. I have a couple adapters that go to full XLR, but the minis are great. They're nice. They're small. I've never noticed any drop in quality or of that sort. They're great. It also has a 3.5 millimeter mic jack and a headphone jack on the side. I've used all 3 at once. You can have 4 channels of audio going at one time, which means you can use both of the mini XLR ports as well as the 3.5 port to have a couple other channels. So that's great. And the headphone jack is nice. It also has a full-size HDMI. Love that. I hate when cameras, I have a couple other here, but they have the mini or the micro HDMI and they're small and you got to get adapters to use stuff with it. It's got a full-size HDMI. That's really convenient. Also has a DC power port right next to where the battery pack goes. There's a little port that you can peel back. I didn't know about this for a while actually, but you can peel this back and there's a little DC power port where you can plug right in. You can use the charger that comes with the camera. You basically just unplug it from the dock where you put your battery on and you use that cable, goes right in your camera, constant power. That's beautiful. Great in podcast scenarios where you don't want to worry about battery. It has a BNC timecode port on the front. So it doesn't have an SDI port, which is like in the cinema world, in the filmmaking world, BNC, SDI, whatever you want to call it. That's like the I don't want to say standard, but just like the most reliable data transfer cable you can use. And it has one here, not for video, still for data transfer, but for timecode. And that's right on the front. Wish it did have a full-size SDI port for data transfer, but you get what you get, and I still love this camera to the moon and back. So 2 SD card slots right in the front, little window, little door opens up. You got 2 little slots there for SDs, and we'll talk about this more, but those are all the ports on the camera. There's other little random hidden ports that are used for updating the camera or whatever. I've never had to deal with that. But those are, that's a hefty amount of ports there. You got, what else? The other extra ports you have is a normal USB Type-C in the side for data transfer, right? Plugging in, emptying your cards if you wanted to. You also have a remote slot there if you want. I've never used that before in my life, but it's there. The next thing I'm going to go into, and again, there's a million, this could be an hour-long video if I wanted it to be. But the features that I find the most attractive about this sweet old camera right here. First off, the built-in ND. I can't even tell you how many times that this has been a huge help in every scenario. If you've ever dealt with ND, or if you didn't have ND and you're like, oh man, I wish I could darken this shot a little bit more without having to adjust these other settings, then you got to put on an adapter on your lens and slide in ND glass, and you got, 0.2, 0.4, 0.8, it's so complicated. You got to carry all this extra stuff around. What if I told you that there are 2 buttons on the side that are plus and minus ND, and it goes all the way up to 10 stops of ND. I'm on 4 stops of ND right now, and it goes all the way up to 10 built in. That's incredible, which means if it's super bright outside, or I'm in a super bright scenario, or I think I have my settings optimized. Quality's great, everything looks great. This is the aperture that I want, and I don't want to risk any of that to make sure exposure is correct. I can just throw a couple stops of ND on there or take some away, and it solves the problem. So that's incredible. Again, it's such a small body, such a small form factor for everything that it has. I can't believe that it has built-in ND. Love that. It also has, and this is like a feature that's not really talked about on this camera a lot, but I love to talk about it. I've told all my friends about it. It has, I forget the actual term for it, but we'll call it smooth aperture transition. Basically, on prime lenses, cinema lenses, okay? There's no zoom ring, right? So there's a focus ring, and then there's an aperture ring to open and close the aperture. And most zoom lenses, you do that from within the camera. You change the settings, aperture 2.8 or 3 or whatever you want, 4, 9. You can change that in the camera. What you're able to do with this camera is I can take a zoom lens and I can attach the aperture to a little wheel that I can slide, and it's not gonna go from full stops of aperture. It's not gonna do that. It's gonna change your aperture in like micro forms. So you can go from aperture 1.2 to 1.4 rather than 1.2 to 1.8. Or 1.8 to 2.8, you can go from 1.8 to 2. And it's like, that's so helpful because again, back to like, I like how my settings are. I don't want to adjust the ISO, and I definitely don't want to touch the shutter speed, right? We'll keep that at 180. But let's say I'm going from outside to inside, and the aperture is a pretty easy way to make that transition as far as lighting goes. But you know, if you've ever done it, you'll know it's very choppy. You'll get a lot of like, and it gets darker like in chunks, okay? With this feature, I can just roll that wheel and unnoticeably, you've changed your aperture. The exposure has changed and it looks incredible. You've not had to touch any settings. You just rolled a little wheel. You didn't change your ISO. You didn't touch anything else. Didn't have to bring in lights. You went from outside, right? Higher aperture, and you're moving inside. You can just lower your aperture to a low number. That's awesome. So I love that. That's honestly one of the that and built-in ND. Like, it's incredible, okay? Next feature I got here, 4 channels of audio. Already talked about that. That's pretty great. Being able to just feed 4 channels of audio into a camera this size, it makes it incredible for every scenario. Podcast, filmmaking, run and gun, or whatever you want. You can have a shotgun mic and a couple lapel mics plugged into the same camera. You monitor all of it on the back. It's got these awesome wheels on the back. You can touch them. That's awesome. I love that. It does have a few different recording modes as well. Like I mentioned earlier, there are 2 SD card slots, and you can set those if you have 2 SD cards in there to do different things. So for instance, if I have 2 SD cards and I have one on one side recording, okay, I can set it to just roll seamlessly over to the next one when that card fills up. Or I can have it record the same thing on both SD cards so I have a backup immediately. I can film something extremely important. Once I'm done recording, I immediately have 2 forms or 2 copies of the same thing. I immediately have a backup. So that's super nice. I use that sometimes, right? If it is a very important scenario, I'll flip that on just so I make sure that I have it twice, gotta be safe. It does have an audio limiter. That's nice. I can set that in camera. I've noticed it does not work for the 3.5 millimeter jack though. The audio limiter only works when you're using in manual mode, the mini XLRs, which is fine, completely fine with me. I'm using it right now and it works great. So that's just a nice feature to have to, again, avoid failure when you're filming. And then the screen that it has, I would say the screen is probably my least favorite thing about this. Not that I hate it or dislike it in any way. It's a 3.5-inch touchscreen display. It flips out on the side. It's very nice. And here's the big drawback. Aside from it being plasticky and kind of loose and you feel like you could break it at any moment, it's 720p. For something that's filming in 4K, 720p, not great. I wish it was at least 1080. I mean, come on, 720p. It's a small screen, but it is what it is. And the absolute greatest thing about this camera, in closing, is it is Netflix. Hear me out now. It's Netflix approved. I could go film a Netflix movie right now. Me, with this camera and a Netflix producer or whatever would look at it, and if they liked it, they'd say, send it on over to Netflix. This camera's Netflix approved. Now, I'm gonna give you the price here in just a second. I don't know if this is the cheapest Netflix approved camera out there, okay? But it is a lot less inexpensive than most Netflix approved cameras. Most Netflix approved cameras are gonna be 50 to 100K. You're talking about Reds and Alexa Minis and stuff like that. Very expensive cameras. You can pick this guy up, a Netflix approved camera with all the specs and features that I just went over for $4,999 currently. Netflix approved, 4K 120, built-in ND, all that for, I mean, $5,000 is a lot of money. Don't get me wrong, but that's, I mean, they're offering a lot here for $5,000. That's a good, solid camera that you can do pretty much anything with and isn't that much bigger. I mean, it's the same size as like a 1DX Mark II, if you know what those are. The old Canon 1DX Mark IIs. It's that, plus about 1,000 features. It's incredible. So I hope you guys like this video. I hope you learned something from it. If you, by chance, wanted to pick one of these up yourself, the link is in the description. I hope you do. It's my favorite camera in the world. I love it more than anything. And I hope that I explained everything in a way that made sense. Let me know if I didn't, and leave a comment if you want me to explain something further. But thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share, and I'll see you guys in the next one.